Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to speak again to you. And this morning we are starting your new series, which is on the book of Matthew, and it is God speaking into our story. So this morning we are looking at Matthew chapter 10. So the book of Matthew is often divided up by scholars into several sections, and that includes 5 what they call discourses, or the sort of teaching, the talky bit, the sermon. And those bookmark the stories that we might be more familiar with. So the first one of those discourses in Matthew comes before we're looking at the book now. So that's called the Sermon on the Mount in chapters 5 and 6. Then you get a middle bit with some other stories. And now we're going to start this teaching series at Matthew chapter 10. And chapter 10 is the section that's a teaching about mission. And it's getting the disciples out there, doing what they have up until this point only seen Jesus doing, not actually experienced themselves. And good teachers model what they want their pupils to do. But that transition is not always easy. Maybe you've experienced something similar. You might learn the theory of how to do something and you watch other people, but when you actually have to do it, it's a totally different experience. You can read books about swimming, you can do your theory test, but until you're in the water or you are sitting in that driving seat, it is just practice. And then you are sometimes literally thrown in at the deep end. So in Matthew chapter 10, Jesus gives more instructions about what the disciples are going to do and how they're going to tell people about Jesus. And this passage in chapter 10 includes quite a lot of the small print, the terms and conditions that really lay bare what the disciples should expect. And spoilers, it is not all good. I don't know whether you're the sort of person that reads the terms and conditions in the small print. I once ruined someone's surprise that they had arranged because I read all the small print in the contract that I was asked to sign before I started something. And I can't help it. I'm just one of those people that likes to check the small print when I'm doing things. I like to read the instructions, even when they don't make sense or can be far too literal. Found some of these on the internet. For example, this washing instruction that says wash inside out. And this is on a scarf, which is clever. It's wood chopping board, wipe clean only, wipe up spills immediately to avoid staining, do not soak, do not use as a chopping board. And finally, this one where the sign says, if your dog poops, pick it up, please. And this reminded me of that brilliant bit in the Paddington film where he sees the sign that says dogs must be carried on the escalator. So in this passage in chapter 10, Jesus is giving the small print, but it is not just meaningless instructions. Sometimes it's hard to work out quite what Jesus is saying, but this small print is also sometimes hard to take. Jesus is being real with his disciples. He gives them instructions, but also difficult warnings. He doesn't pull any punches. Some of what he says is stark and difficult. I mean, it all starts off quite well in chapter 10, verse 1. And he called to him his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every disease and affliction. And this is a fantastic start. The disciples are called and given authority, given that authority by Jesus. How wonderful and how exciting for them. They've seen Jesus do all of the things that are mentioned here. You can read about them in the early chapters of Matthew. And now Jesus gives the disciples the power to go and do that themselves. Then he gives the list of the names of the 12 disciples. And then after that, there are more detailed instructions. In verses 5 to 15, Jesus outlines that they're to go out on this mission trip without the resources that they might need. It's a short trip and it's to Jewish areas, and they're supposed to be supported by the people that are around them. Okay, sounding a bit tougher, but sure. Hospitality was massively important in that culture, so it makes sense. What next? Well, verses 16 to 24 moves to a section about how persecution is coming. And it says things like this. Matthew 10, verses 17 and 18. Beware of men, for they will deliver you over to courts and flog you in their synagogues, and you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. Not only this, but Jesus goes on to say that families will be pitted against each other because of the message the disciples are to take. The disciples will face rejection, it says. And in verse 22, it says, they will be hated by all for my name's sake. And in the next section of this chapter, in verses 26 to 33, Jesus tells the disciples not to be afraid, and thank goodness after all of this. And there is some comfort here, and it comes to probably some of the more famous verses and more familiar verses in this passage. Verse 29 says, aren't 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Not one of them will fall to the ground without your Father knowing about it. Even the hairs of your head are numbered. Fear not, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. And here, of course, we get these charming Christian images that people put verses on top of to make you feel better about life. But I just wonder about these as words of comfort. And your takeaway from this is what, but Jesus, sparrows die and God knows about it. And I guess this idea about the sparrows and God numbering the hairs on my head shows his complete care and understanding for me. I'm just not sure as a disciple, I feel totally comforted by this. And as the chapter carries on, verses 34 to 39, the reality of the situation is addressed again. Families one against the other. God's position in the order of our lives. Verse 37 to 39, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. There were not as many cute Christian pictures for this one. And Jesus is talking about priorities here, that we have to have things in order. Loyalty and commitment to Jesus has to come first, whatever the cost. He's facing the disciples with the stark truth of what they might be about to face. And I have to confess that I have really struggled with this passage. And I've done all the normal things that I would do to prepare. I've read the passage several times. I've read around the passage. I've looked at different commentaries. I've listened to podcasts. I've sat with the passage. I've taken this passage on walks with me, several walks. And still, I really struggled with it. And Ben can tell you quite how late I am in sending him this talk. I'm sorry, Ben. And as I struggled with this passage, I tried to work out why I was struggling with it. And I think it's because this isn't the passage that I want at the moment. This is not the words that I want to hear from Jesus at the moment. And we are in the middle of this pandemic. And I don't know about you, but I've not always had everything together in the last few months. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, I haven't had it all together. And as there have been waves of the pandemic, I guess I've gone in waves too. And I probably never will be an optimist, but we've all faced so much over the last few months and life has changed so much. And we've all faced losses. Sometimes there've been losses of loved ones that we haven't been able to say goodbye to properly. Sometimes it's been a loss of purpose as activities that we would normally fill our lives with have slowly been stripped away. You might have lost some of your sense of community as a church. You might have lost your job, or you might have to tell those that you're responsible for that they will lose their job. There are all the plans that we made that we've lost for weddings or holidays, or even just to see your relatives. And against this background, I don't want this passage in Matthew 10. I don't want to hear Jesus tell me in verses 14 and 15 and 23 that I'm going to be rejected. I don't want Jesus to say when, not if, but when persecution comes, as he does in verse 23. I don't want to hear Jesus say that family relationships are less important than him, as he does in verse 21 and 35 and 36. I don't want Jesus to tell me that we will be hated by all because of him. I don't want Jesus to tell me that if I don't take up my cross and follow him, then I'm not worthy of him. What I want is that first discourse from the Sermon in the Mount, not this one. I don't want this course, I want the other one. I want to be told things like, blessed are those that mourn, for they shall be comforted. I want the spiritual hug of passages that tell me that I'm loved, that there is a plan, and that that plan is good. And as I look to an uncertain future, through autumn, towards winter and Advent, I want to hear about Jesus coming to me, about him loving me. I want the spiritual equivalent of sitting at home with my slippers on in front of a fire and eating crumpets. And I didn't get that. I didn't get that. I got Matthew 10. I didn't want to hear about being sent to hard, draining, spiritually wearing circumstances. And against this pandemic, if I'm totally honest, I don't know that I want to be sent at all. Because so often I want the comfort without the cost. I want the call, but not the calling we're given. I want the cure, but I don't want the consequences. Have you ever read that leaflet that comes in your pack of tablets with that terrifying list of side effects? And often the side effects are worse than the reason that you're taking the medication to start with. Sometimes the side effects that the medicine can give you are actually the very things that you're taking the medicine for. Those migraine tablets where a side effect is listed as headaches. But we take the tablets because it's worth the risk for the potential cure. And that's what Jesus is giving us. Being a disciple is costly. It's not all comfort. I came across this quote in my preparation. Discipleship is not just a part of our Christian life, it must define us as human beings. It's Krish Kandiah. Discipleship is not just a part of our Christian life, it must define us as human beings. And to me, one of the most amazing things about this passage in Matthew 10 is that there's 18 more chapters of Matthew. The disciples stuck around. They went off on this mission trip, but they came back. And there must have been something about Jesus that made them do that. And they definitely don't get the journey right all the time. And later in Matthew, we'll hear about their highs and lows, how they ran away, denied Jesus, hid at crucial moments. But at this point in the story of Matthew, facing an uncertain future, they trust Jesus. And this passage in Matthew 8 reminds us of who these 12 were. Going through their names early on, it reminds us that when they were called, it wasn't because they came with talents or abilities or they came from certain areas. They came because they were willing. They were willing to give up their lives for Jesus. So I guess that's all I have to offer you. Jesus who demands everything. Jesus who himself gave everything. Who promises us everything, sometimes through pain and tears and discomfort. And we can do so much to avoid suffering, to avoid the circumstances that Jesus demands of us, that he tells us about in this passage. But being a disciple means looking this passage in the face, looking these things, looking this discomfort in the face and saying, okay, it's going to be tough, but I'll go. I don't know how you feel about that, whether you're in the same position as me and you'd like a really nice talk this Sunday morning, a talk that makes you feel better about yourself. You want the spiritual roaring log fire and that mug of hot chocolate. And I could give you that, I guess, but Jesus doesn't. He says it will be hard and that you might face some terrible things. But ultimately, Jesus also offers you himself, his love, his understanding, his honesty. And I found myself coming back to Blue Like Jazz by Donald Miller and to a section right near the end of the book where he says this. I think the difference in my life came when I realised, after reading the Gospels, that Jesus didn't just love me out of principle. He didn't just love me because it was the right thing to do. Rather, there was something inside me that caused him to love me. I think I realised that if I walked up to his campfire, he would ask me to sit down and he would ask me my story. He would take the time to listen to my ramblings or my anger until I could calm down. And then he would look me directly in the eye and he would speak to me. He would tell me the truth. And I would sense in his voice and in the lines on his face that he liked me. We might be looking to a future that might include suffering and pain, rejection and discomfort. And we're looking to the next few months where we can't really plan properly or even imagine what's going to happen. We can know that we are not alone. We can do it because of Jesus, because he is honest with us that it will not be easy. But we will sense in his voice and in the lines on his face that he likes you, that he will be with you, that in the end, it will be worth it.